Welcome to this presentation. Here the subject is the end of the age, or at least some aspects of the end of the age. Now this is going to be a long presentation, so it will be split into two parts to hopefully make it more easily digestible. Now the subject has been of great interest, and also the subject of a lot of mockery and comedy as well. In particular, we're going to look at a conversation that Jesus had with his disciples. This is a conversation that's recorded in 3 of the Gospels, in Matthew 24, Mark 13 and Luke 21. And in this case, the disciples were talking to Jesus after they'd seen the temple, and they had a discussion on the Mount of Olives. And the main points of this conversation were general comments about the age and advice for believers, and details about the destruction of the temple and the end of the age. Now, the 3 Gospels cover slightly different aspects of this conversation. There are little bits that are missing from Matthew 24 that are included in Luke 21, and vice versa, bits that are missing from Luke 21 that are included in Matthew. And you might ask, why are the bits missing? Well, if you look at the bits that are missing from Matthew 24, they're subjects that are already covered earlier on in the Gospel of Matthew in chapter 10. So perhaps Matthew, when he's writing the account, decided not to include stuff that had already been captured earlier on. And similarly for Luke, there were bits that are missing that were previously discussed in Luke 17. So perhaps when Luke was writing the Gospel, he didn't want to duplicate something that had already been mentioned earlier. Now, because of the slight differences, because of a slight misalignment, you could say, it's important to look at the verses in comparison with each other and try and line up which verses compare with which ones, so that we can fully tie it together and not get confused. There are lots of things in this passage that get really confused and have been subject of quite a bit of misunderstanding. Part of it's understandable. People are very keen about the return of the Lord, the return of Jesus Christ, and they're looking forward to that very much. So they interpret many things as the return of Christ, when perhaps some of it is not exclusively talking about the return of Christ, but talking about other things. So, starting off, we won't read all of the 3 scriptures all the time, but reading in this case from Mark chapter 13, as he went out of the temple, one of his disciples said unto him, Master, see what manner of stones and what buildings are here. In Luke's account it says, and some spoke of a temple how it was adorned with goodly stones and gifts. He said, and Jesus said unto them, See not all these things? Verily I say unto you, there shall not be left here one stone upon another that shall not be thrown down. So again, repeated in the other Gospels, a remarkable statement. This temple that had taken 46 years to build at enormous effort, very impressive structure, and yet Jesus is saying every stone will be cast down, and that was fulfilled many years later, 40 years later, when the Romans came and destroyed the temple and much of Jerusalem. As he sat upon the Mount of Olives, the disciples came unto him privately, saying, Tell us when shall these things be, and what shall be the sign of thy coming and of the end of the world? So they're asking him a number of questions. When will the temple be destroyed? What will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the world? And similarly, in Luke's Gospel, what sign will be when these things shall come to pass? So there are multiple questions that have been put to Jesus, and so Jesus starts to answer with many different things that are relevant. The destruction of the temple and the end of the age. Obviously, the destruction of the temple happened long before the end of the age, and what signs will there be? What should people be looking for? Obviously, people need a warning when the temple is going to be destroyed so they could flee, and Jesus did exactly that. And Jesus answered and said unto them, Take heed that no man deceive you. So before anything else, Jesus says, be careful. Don't let anybody deceive you or confuse you or set you on the wrong path. And for many shall come in my name, saying, I am Christ, and shall deceive many. So it's easy to misunderstand a verse like this, but when it says, many shall come in my name, saying, I am Christ, that doesn't mean the individual necessarily is going to say that they are Jesus Christ. Maybe some demented people think that they are Jesus Christ, or maybe in some figurative sense some people see themselves in that light, but I don't think this is what these verses are talking about. This is talking about people coming in the name of Christ. They're coming as Christians and saying that Jesus is Christ, but they will still deceive many. And Luke adds one little bit and says, and the time for many shall come in my name, saying, I am Christ, and the time draweth near, go ye not after them. So an interesting extra little bit there, that these people coming in the name of Christ, calling themselves Christian, but among the things that they'll be saying is that the time draws near, and don't go after them. So the coming of Christ was something that was going to be a big deal, something that many people were going to talk about, even people who were going to be deceivers and mislead people. And there are going to be many people calling themselves Christian and saying that Jesus is the Christ, but they'll be deceivers, fooling many. Now, I don't particularly want to focus on one particular individual or point fingers at individuals or even individual churches or ministries, but there is a mass movement these days which you could describe as a prosperity gospel, which comes and says Jesus is Christ, but they're deceiving many with many of the things that they're saying. Among the things that they're saying is the continual clamoring for money. It goes on and on with all the books that they want you to buy and special things that they ask you to donate money for, or even asking for money so that they will pray for you, all kinds of things, much like the money changers in the temple that Jesus cast out with the whip, but they're still there in these religious people in the temple, in a metaphorical sense, but money changers trying to grab money off people, sometimes even off people who really can't afford it, and using good Bible principles like tithing and exploiting it for their own benefit. So, all kinds of things going on which we don't have time to discuss now. And there are so many people that engage in this kind of behavior. In Luke 12 verse 15, and he said unto them, Take heed and beware of covetousness, for a man's life consists not in the abundance of the things which he possesses. Take heed and beware of covetousness. And so one of the important things for people to beware of is don't have this craving for things and possessions and all that kind of thing. And this is what they're playing into, that if you give money, you'll get this massive reward coming back from the Lord because you donated to this particular church. But it's an attitude, a way of thinking. It's fundamentally flawed, fundamentally wrong. It's not just the religious world that's misleading people, it's the secular world with all its advertising, trying to encourage covetousness, trying to encourage you to want this and want that and want the other thing. For your life is more than the things that the abundance of the things which you possess. Of course, if you're living a godly life, God will look after you and provide for you. But even if you fall into various trials, we still want to follow the Lord. Just like Job, when he lost everything, he still wanted to follow the Lord. 1 Peter 2:1 says, But there were false prophets also among the people, even as there shall be false teachers among you, who privily shall bring in damnable heresies, even denying the Lord that brought them, and bring upon themselves swift destruction. And many shall follow their pernicious ways, by reason of whom the way of truth shall be even spoken of. And through covetousness they shall with feigned words make merchandise of you, whose judgment now of a long time lingereth not, and their damnation slumbereth not. And because of these people, all of Christianity will be spoken evil of. And as it says there in verse 2, the way of truth shall be spoken evil of because of these people. And they'll make merchandise of you. They'll use you and exploit you. And if you have time, read the Amplified Version to understand more about this verse, the way that they think that they can use you for money. In 1 Corinthians 9:18, what is my reward then? Verily, that when I preach the gospel, I may make the gospel of Christ without charge, that I abuse not my power in the gospel. So that was Paul's message. I may make the gospel of Christ without charge, but these people, they want you to come into their services and their meetings and their crusades and hand over cash in huge quantities instead of a gospel without charge. And they do abuse their power. So Jesus really did warn us not to be deceived. For many shall come in my name, saying, I am Christ, and the time draweth near. And there are endless theories and predictions about the end of the age and the return of Christ, and fables about the rapture. Rapture is a word that literally doesn't appear in the Bible. The general idea of being caught up to meet the Lord in the air is in the scripture, but the way it's presented is a completely distorted and bizarre way. Now in Acts 1:17, and he said unto them, It's not for you to know the times or the seasons which the Father has put in his own power. but there's so many things. You can look up more recent examples of people claiming to know the time. When I did this presentation first, it was around 1915, and people were saying, is Jesus going to return during the blood red moon of 2015, and is Jesus is coming in September, October 2015, the rapture of the church is imminent, and they just keep going on and on about this. Final Jubilee will begin on the Day of Atonement in 1915. Obviously now we know that never took place, and these false prophets, they never apologize for their false prophecies. They just go on and on. No doubt you'll find more prophecies today, except different words, but same idea. They're so wrapped up in the return of Christ and saying the time draws near and these things are about to happen, and no, they make their prophecies and it never comes to pass. Now in Genesis 2, the Lord God commanded the man of every tree of the garden thou may eat freely eat, but of a tree of knowledge of good and evil thou shalt not eat of it, for in the day that thou eatest thereof thou shalt surely die. So just one tree they were not allowed to eat from, and that is the one they wanted. And just like people were told, no man knows the hour or the day, and yet this is the one that they wanted to proclaim. Also in the story of the Tower of Babel, 11:4, and they said, go to, let's build us a city and a tower whose top may reach unto heaven. Let us make a name, lest we be scattered abroad among the face of the earth. And verse 9, therefore is the name of it called Babel, because the Lord did there confound the language of all the earth, and from thence did the Lord scatter them abroad upon the face of all the earth. And in similar way, people are trying to build up a tower that they may reach up into heaven, reach up into areas that they've got no right to take into, and they want to make a name for themselves. They want to be famous, famous for having said that the Lord's going to return at this time, and famous with their books and all the rest. They are trying to reach up into heaven, but the Lord confounded their language and scattered them, and these people are as confounded and scattered as you can possibly imagine. So they're still trying to build their own towers and their own religions to reach into the heavens, but their language has been confused and contradictory. Now Mark 14 verse 55 and 56, and the chief priests and all the council sought for witness against Jesus to put him to death, and found none, for many bear false witness against him, but their witness agreed not together. So these people spoke against Jesus, but the key aspect of it, their testimony didn't agree. They bore false witness, but they're all saying different things, and that's a characteristic of those bearing false witness, and also a characteristic of the false prophets of this age. There are a few more confused and contradictory stories in the religious world than those about the end of the age and the return of Christ. You get terms like dispensationalist, premillennialism, amillennialism, postmillennialism, premillennialism, pre-tribulation rapture, mid-tribulation rapture, post-tribulation rapture, pre-wrath rapture. And if you look for any of those words in the Bible, you will not find one of them. So all these different views, many of them are based around a period of tribulation, a 7-year tribulation, a fanciful story that they've invented before the coming of Jesus, And so some believe the rapture occurs before the tribulation, some during the tribulation, some after the tribulation, and it's just a confused mess, all the things that they talk about. And again, their testimony doesn't agree. Amillennialism does not believe in a literal millennium, even though it's spoken of in the book of Revelation. And they claim 1,000 years an expression, a way of referring to the entire period from the first coming of Christ 2,000 years ago until the future second coming. Many amillennialists believe that during this time period the church will continue to evangelize and grow, as well as suffer declination in periods until Christ's coming. The second coming will be a natural culmination of a process of world evangelicalization rather than a revolutionary event that brings sudden and dramatic change. And this point of view includes most Roman Catholics, Eastern Orthodox, Anglicans, and Lutherans. So that's a huge bunch not believing in a literal millennium. Postmillennialism does not believe in premillennial appearance of Christ. The postmillennial position is that millennium began at the inauguration of Christ's kingdom reign when he ascended to his heavenly throne, and happens not as a result of the coming of Christ, but as the global population converts to Christianity as a result of evangelism. The age of peace is still a progressing work of divine grace, but without the visible presence of Christ to take the place of an earthly ruler. Christ will appear at the end of a millennium to lead his people into the heavenly city, the New Jerusalem. Again, not consistent with what the book of Revelation says, or with any of what the scriptures say. The pre-tribulation position advocates that the rapture will occur before the beginning of a 7-year tribulation period, or the second coming will occur at the end of a 7-year tribulation period. Pre-tribulationists often describe the rapture as Jesus coming for the church, and the second coming as Jesus coming with the church. And there are many people advocating this position, including Jimmy Swaggart, J. Dwight, Pentecost, Tim LaHaye, James Vernon McGee, Perry Stone, Chuck Smith, Hal Lindsey, Jack Van Imp, Chuck Missler, and so on and so on. It just goes on. Mid-tribulation believes that the rapture will occur at the middle of a tribulation period, and there are various people who believe this. It's a minority view among many people, among premillennialists. Pre-Roth rapture places the rapture at some point during the tribulation, and various people again who believe this. And so many predictions for the return of Christ. If you're unfortunate, you might find many of these things again being presented. All these things have been presented over the ages, and it just goes on and on and on. It goes all the way back to the 1800s and before. Many of these people claiming that they know when Christ would return, and what happens? Nothing. And when their prophecies are found to be false, what happens? Nothing. No consequences at all. Now we all know, or should all know, that in Deuteronomy 18 it defines what a false prophet is, or one of the clues as to a false prophet. And if I say in thy heart, how shall we know the word which the Lord has not spoken? When a prophet speaks in the name of the Lord, if a thing follow not, nor come to pass, That is the thing which the Lord has not spoken, but the prophet has spoken it presumptuously. Thou shalt not be afraid of him. In fact, in Deuteronomy they were even supposed to stone the prophet who'd spoken presumptuously, and that was the definition of a false prophet. And yet these people keep coming along with great swelling words and self-importance, and never stop to consider that they follow the definition of a false prophet. 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 verse 2, that ye be not soon shaken in mind or be troubled, neither by spirit, nor by word, nor by letter, as from us, as that the day of Christ is at hand. And we come back to the discussion from the Temple Mount discussion, as we might call it. Don't be troubled again, as we read in the previous verse there. Don't be troubled or shaken as though the day of Christ is at hand. And in Matthew 24 it says, and you shall hear of wars, rumours of wars. See that you be not troubled, for all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet. And this is one of the things that's important to realize. It's not necessarily saying that wars and rumours of wars are going to increase. It's saying, don't be troubled. These things are going to come to pass. There will be wars, and there will be rumours of wars, and all kinds of trouble. There'll be famines, and there'll be pestilences, and all these things have happened. But don't be troubled. The end is not yet. And when first creating this presentation around 2015, there was a lot of talk about Russia and its military might, and Russia unveiling a new Armata tank. In the end, their tank has proved not to be particularly effective in the Ukraine war, but it's again wars and rumours of wars, rumours of possible trouble. And of course, Russia still has the huge intercontinental ballistic missile fleet that is at their disposal, and often they use this as threats. Who knows how well any of this equipment will work, and when or if this will ever take place, if they use their weapons. Again, in the context of don't be troubled, every time you see something happening, for nation shall rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. And that's been the last 2,000 years. Wars of conquest, civil wars, and all kinds of problems. Famines and pestilences, earthquakes in diverse places. And there have been things like massive plagues. And in the 6th century there was a massive plague that decimated the then known world. And again, 1300s, the Black Death, which decimated Europe. And again, all these things have happened. Don't be troubled, don't be shaken. Don't think the Lord's going to return just because something dramatic is happening in the world. All these things must come to pass. So, in an example, there was a massive earthquake in Nepal in 2015. The quake caused the statue of a Hindu god to topple from its pillar. And just a reminder that these are puny idols they can't look after themselves. They just fall over as soon as there's an earthquake. All these are the beginning of sorrows. So to my mind, this is saying that this is just the beginning. This is not the end of the age or the right at the end. This is just pains and sorrows. So general comments for the age: don't be deceived. There'll be people coming in the name of Christ. Don't be troubled. There'll be wars and rumors of wars, but the end is not yet. There will be famines and pestilences and earthquakes. All these are beginnings of sorrows. Now, the word sorrows sometimes refers to birth pains, giving rise to the suggestion that the famines, pestilences, and earthquakes will increase as the end draws near. And some people have claimed that earthquakes are on the increase, and actually, when you look at the information, earthquakes haven't actually increased at all, but some people have claimed this and drawn even some quite dramatic graphs to indicate an increase of earthquakes, but a lot of this can be described as misinformation coming from unreliable sources, sometimes with the name creation science, or sometimes ultimately traceable to the Jehovah's Witnesses institution, but unreliable. When you look at reliable sources, genuine scientific sources, you find that there's no increase in earthquakes. The magnitude hasn't increased, and so if you look either at the magnitude or the number of earthquakes or the distribution of earthquakes, there hasn't really been a change. Obviously there's a scatter of events. It's not the identical number every year. So if we look at the earthquakes from 2000 to 2023, it goes up and down randomly, and there's no particular dramatic increase for the worldwide instance of earthquakes. If you look at the distribution of earthquakes, it follows a fairly well-known pattern. Much of the earthquakes happen along a so-called ring of fire around the Pacific Basin and around tectonic plates, but that doesn't mean that you don't occasionally get earthquakes in other locations that don't normally get earthquakes. Every now and then these things do happen, and it's all very much well known, nothing out of the ordinary, nothing to see here. In the promise, Hal Lindsey states, Jesus warned that earthquakes would increase in frequency and intensity as this old earthquake prepared for its final cataclysm. He says that this piece of a prophetic jigsaw puzzle is supposed to be taking place in our day. In his book, Goodbye Planet Earth, Hal Lindsey makes these claims in his book. 1980s Countdown to Armageddon. There have been many great earthquakes throughout history, but according to surprisingly well-kept records in the past, they did not occur very frequently. That's actually not correct. The Japanese have kept very good records for the last 1,000 years, and at least as far as the Japanese are concerned, they haven't seen vast differences in the number of earthquakes in their part of the world. But he claimed the 20th century, however, has experienced an unprecedented increase in the frequency of these calamities. In fact, the number of earthquakes per decade has roughly doubled in each of the 10-year periods since 1950. And that's actually quite incorrect. In 1950, the one thing that is notable is that seismic equipment has become more sensitive and more widespread and covers all of the world, so the measuring equipment is more available more accurate, and covers the whole world. But the actual number as such hasn't increased. It is true that the impact is more severe because of the larger populations. But again, there are so many false prophets that say these things. Seventh-day Adventist author Robert H. Pearson has a subheading, "A Shaking, Quaking Planet." Under it he states, "With increasing frequency and intensity, Mother Earth has been shaking and quaking. Hundreds of thousands of people have lost their lives," and again, it just goes on. And again, Jehovah's Witnesses, the frequency of major earthquakes has increased about 20 times what it was on an average during the 2,000 years between 1914. Again, not true at all. And false prophets again. Professing themselves to be wise, they became fools. So meditate that. So the best you could say, they haven't done their homework if they claim that the earthquakes are increasing. At worst, you'd say they're false prophets. For the time will come when they will not endure sound doctrine, but after their own lust they shall heap to themselves teachers having itching ears, and they shall turn away their ears from the truth, and be turned unto fables. So they turned aside from the truth, and earthquakes are neither here nor there, unless you're actually in the area affected by it. But they are turning away from truth in the sense of what's the truth about whether they're actually increasing or not. But they're turning aside to fables, which is to say that they are increasing. And they've got these itching ears there that want to listen to these odd things. And with all deceit of unrighteousness in those who perish, because they did not receive the love of the truth, so that they might be saved. And for this cause God shall send them strong delusion, that they should believe a lie, so that all those who do not believe the truth, but delight in unrighteousness, might be condemned. So again, a terrible warning for people. If you don't have a love for the truth, God will send you strong delusion. You prefer lies, so be it. Here you are. Have a strong delusion to keep you confused. And there's so many people with strong delusions in the world, and I bet not get started with the anti-vaxxers or the people who believe allergies don't exist, or there's even a silly YouTuber who thinks the Roman Empire never existed. All these crazy people out there in the world, they don't have a love for the truth, so they believe all kinds of silly things. And so, deep down inside you, at your very innermost being, it's important, have a love for the truth. If you take nothing else from these scriptures, take this and take hold of it. For we are not as many which corrupt the word of God, but as of sincerity, but as of God in the sight of God, we speak Christ. We don't corrupt the word of God to make up fanciful stories. Take it at face value. If you don't understand it, say you don't fully understand it yet, and I stress the word yet. You may not understand it right now. That doesn't mean that the Lord won't reveal it to you at some later date, as long as you want to know the truth. And then it goes on, and perhaps this is a place to stop, but then Jesus goes on to talk about the persecutions that will come. Then shall they deliver you up to be afflicted, and shall kill you. all the terrible things that were going to happen to Christians in the gospel age. Obviously, things that happened soon after Jesus was crucified. Soon afterwards, the Jews persecuted the Christians, then the Romans persecuted the Christians, then various other peoples persecuted the Christians, delivered them up. So we'll conclude part 1 here, and please continue to listen to part 2.